Welcome to another episode of Stoke Meter, and we have the pleasure of having a good buddy here, Manahi Taber-Kewene. And Manahi, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness, it's a pleasure to have you on here. And we've been talking about this for a little bit, right? It's just
you have indeed.
it is, and I'll tell you what, it's Manahi and I have it's a funny history. We actually ran track and field at a college in Eastern Idaho a long time ago. Won't even say how long ago. Didn't even know each other over there. And then we were in New York City together, and all of a sudden, all these little connections started to happen. And we were both over at Columbia, and Manahi was studying film at the time, and would always tell us some pretty awesome stories because he had some pretty famous classmates. Julia Stiles, if anyone remembers Julia Stiles, the actress over there, and just to get that personal view of rubbing with greatness, it was awesome. But yeah, and some of the things that you have done, they're quite amazing. I remember even some of the mini projects that you were doing going to grad school were just fantastic. Some of the photos you took and some of the films that you did. I'm just wondering if you could just take us to what took you to film. I mean, you've always been one of those really creative type of individuals that has a knack for stuff, but what got you there, man?
That's a really good question. You know, when I was growing up, I was the kid who was always like pretty good at drawing, and I loved anything to do with art. I just loved I loved to make things. My mother used to bring home, we didn't have a lot of money growing up, and my mother worked at this dental office, and she used to bring home these stacks of unused cardstock paper that they were going to throw out. And I would bend and fold and I'd make these cardstock things into Star Wars things. Like I made a little land speeder, and then I got some clear plastic from some packaging, and I made the thing underneath so it could like float. And so I was always like that kid who just liked to make stuff. That was definitely me. But I always thought, because my father was such a big influence, that I would go to business school, and that seemed like, you know, my parents supported me, but it, you know, especially back in those days, I don't think that anybody, certainly not in my world, saw being an artist as something that you do for a living. Like that's a hobby, right? And it took me a really long time to sort of figure out what I wanted to do. And it took me a while to find my way to film. And it's funny because over the years, I've had people come to me and ask me a lot of different questions about, well, how did I end up where I am? And I often find myself saying, and I have these conversations with my son, who's very much artistically inclined. And I say that, you know,
oh, he's incredible.
Thank you. I think so too. I'm his biggest fan. If you can be an artist and make a living at it, you're very fortunate. But if you can be an artist and provide for a family, if you can be an artist and provide for a family and live in a good neighborhood where there are good schools, you're really fortunate. It's a tough, you know, depending on what it is that you do, it's a tough road to hoe, largely because artists don't often have a traditional path. If you're going to be a dentist, if you're going to be an attorney, there are these set paths that one takes to get to that place. But for filmmakers of any variety, narrative, documentary, commercial, there's no established path, really.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. So it seems like all the people that I've ever met that are successful artists or in the creative atmosphere, it always seems like there's a point in their life where they make that, I call it kind of jumping into the deep end, where they say, I'm in, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to make the sacrifices, and and go through the struggle to make this work. Can you tell us, did you have a moment in your career or your life that was what you would consider your jumping into the deep end?
Yes, I owe it all to my wife, 100%. Because when I was, long story made short, I graduated from high school with it's like a 2.3 GPA.
Amen, brother.
Stellar.
Yes, same here, man.
Yeah, I applied to 2 places straight out of high school. I applied to BYU and I applied to Ricks College. I got rejected from BYU. Ricks College took me because they'll take anybody. At least they did back then. and I ended my first year on academic probation. Yeah, I did a full confession here. And long story made short, when I was late in high school, I was diagnosed with severe dyslexia. And dyslexia has nothing to do with native intelligence. It has everything to do with how you bring information, input, right? And I just really struggled. And I know that everybody and their dog goes to college, but I just didn't think that that was going to be for me. And long story made short, 16 years after I had graduated from high school, and I never fully engaged with college. I took a community class here and there, and I ended up on academic probation after a year at Ricks. It was when I was living in New York, and I owe a lot of credit to Christina, my wife, and my brother-in-law, Paul, who encouraged me. And I was working at an ad agency at the time, and I ended up taking night classes at Hunter College in New York. And just the process of applying for Hunter College, like, brought me to tears. No joke. I had a lot of academic baggage, right? And after a year of success there, I finally realized that I think I can do this. And so I actually quit my job. I applied to Columbia University, and I got in, and I went full time. And then I got my degree in cultural anthropology. While I was at Columbia, and I really wanted to study cultural anthropology for a number of reasons, primarily because I'm always interested in what constitutes culture. And being somebody who is biracial, from New Zealand originally, from a white European mother and a Polynesian father, I'm just always interested in what constitutes that. And while I was at school, I realized what I really want to do is I want to do films. I really want to make specifically like documentary films. That was kind of my primary interest at the time. And I had some really fortunate contacts. And when I graduated, I started working as a camera operator and an editor, freelance, both, all the time. But it really wasn't, if it wasn't for the fact that my wife, who is just coming out of law school, and was able to make it possible for me to like make peanuts while I'm freelancing and like trying to find my way. And New York is a competitive place. You know, and in that industry especially, you kind of have to be willing to find a way to make it work. You know, even people who go to film school, many of them don't follow a career in film. Many of them go on to do other things. And the one thing that film school doesn't do is it doesn't teach you how to make money. And
Sure.
the industry that we work in is predominantly freelance. And so over the course of years, I got more experience and I just was able to do more things. And I started my own little tiny full service production company, mainly doing like commercial work and like doc style kind of commercial work, because that sort of leaned on my experience and my interest. And that's a long-winded way of saying, how did I, did I answer your question right?
That was
did.
perfect,
Awesome.
man.
Awesome.
Seriously, that was perfect, because I took so many nuggets that leads to other questions. But one of the things that really was poignant, I don't know, Gary, if you got on it too, but every successful artist that we've interviewed so far, which is I think 3 so far, their wife was pivotal. or their significant other was pivotal, they would not let them pursue something lesser than the passion that they had. And that's just huge. And knowing Christina as well, good night. I can only imagine the Uber support that she gave. So that's fantastic. And it's neat to see that it goes both ways between you folks. It's amazing. But the other thing that you brought up, and I have it in my notes here in big letters, culture. I've known you, and having lived in a Polynesian influenced state, I never realized how much culture had to play in connecting people and in motivating people. And knowing that you are originally New Zealand, every time there is that strong connection to New Zealand. And I'm just wondering, how does that play out in you as a filmographer?
Story.
Yeah.
We are big time storytellers.
Mm.
You know, when Taika Waititi stood up there and got the Oscar,
Mhm.
he said, "We are the original storytellers," meaning we, the indigenous people. He wasn't even referring to just us as Maori in New Zealand. He's
Yeah.
talking about indigenous people. Um, you know, for a lot of indigenous cultures, that's how you track your history. We didn't even really have a written history until colonization, and the British came along and put a written form to our language.
Mm.
So, you know, that's why carving is such an integral part of Maori culture. Every indigenous culture has their form of how they retain their history, how they retain their stories. But I think that for me, probably it's just sort of ingrained in my DNA a little bit. I'm always interested in stories.
You know,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I'm just going to say the last thing, you know, film as a medium wouldn't have the power that it has if it weren't for what it can do with stories. When you take a visual and you take a narrative and you put them together, I mean, how many of us have watched a film, for example, and it still sits with you days later,
Yes.
right? Um, you know, I'm not saying that people don't stand in front of a still painting and cry, but it's not quite the same as a film that can move you emotionally and have a lot of impact. So yeah, story.
When you were talking about story, I kid you not, I had chicken skin, my goosebumps everywhere, because no, again, looking at my mother, Japanese culture, she's ironically visiting today, so, and looking at how that history revealed itself into the pride of today, it is something that is not only generational, but to me, it touches well beyond your own family. And I remember when I saw the picture of you and Taika. For those of you that might not know Taika Waititi, he might be under a rock or something like that. He's been an Oscar winner as of late, but also a Maori. When I saw you two in the picture, it just told me, to your point, a story. And the story was well beyond what the pomp and circumstance that Hollywood gives you. It told me the story of two Maori brothers. And that to me was much more deep reaching than any success that you have attained, because you had that commonality that bound you two together. And to know that inspires you is something that, to me, maintains the integrity of the story being told. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, and Taika inspires me. He's like freakishly talented. Yeah.
Yeah, he's funny as heck too, man.
He is funny as heck.
I'll say one of the things that I don't know, when you were talking, same thing, you just kind of give me chills, because I just think culture is such an incredible thing. And in today's society, we're just being bombarded by so much information, and what I like to call just brain candy. There's just some of it's just not really worth anything. And sometimes I catch myself going, why am I looking at this stuff? You know, why am I wasting my time? You know, and so when you see something that's so important as culture, and your ability to put that into a documentary or a film, and what I like about it is it preserves the stuff that's worthwhile. You know what I mean? The stuff that's really important, the things that tie people together.
Yeah.
In the stuff that you've done, what's the one thing you look at and that you're the most proud of, that you look at and say, man, I nailed it. This is, I hope people think of me and remember this.
I'm struggling for a moment, in part because I often say this, film is a team sport. You know, it's never just one person. Sometimes I have played that sport as one person. I know that those people who know me know that years ago I started making these Christmas videos, and it started out when my kids were really little, and I don't know, I had this idea. We were in our little apartment in New York City, and I put up this black backdrop, and it might have been Christina, my wife's idea, who said, let's interview the kids and let's make this little Christmas video. And all of it just went wrong. All of it, the kids were just not behaving. It was just like horrible. And then one of us said, you just got to embrace it. Take all of that and just make something funny. Just make a compilation of it. And to this day, I'm baffled at how many people have watched that and laughed. And, but since then, Christina got the idea that, you know, hey, I don't have to send out Christmas cards anymore. You make a Christmas video. But the thing is that, like, year after year, it's kind of like Groundhog's Day. It's like same topic, same theme, same cast of reluctant characters, my kids, and it's got to be something different, right? So now I'm at the place where, like, I spend considerable amount of time before Christmas really, like, thinking through, like, what, and I've gone through, oh my gosh, so many different themes and variations. One had opera music, I had a hip hop dance theme thing. Last year was completely different. It really had very little to do with Christmas. It was about my personal ode to the pandemic.
Yes.
But Gary, to loop back, you know, like, what am I most proud of? The first thing that comes to me for me is probably my personal stuff, because that's, while it's fun for me to do, while it's fun to share, I'm also, to me, that is family history, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that years from now, when my family looks back on that, and that will mean something, that will mean something to me, to be able to see them, to be able to hear them at that age, at that stage of life, that is most proud for me. I mean, I am definitely proud of a lot of the professional things that I've been able to do as well. You know, early on in my career, documentaries, I got involved in a project called Planet B-Boy.
Oh, yes. Amazing.
Thank you. And huge thanks to Benson Lee, the director, who brought me on for that. And, you know, we made this documentary that we could not get off the ground, and I could not figure out why we couldn't get funding for this thing. I knew we had something really great, but in the end, you know, we had our world premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival. We got selected for the outdoor screening, which if you've ever been there, it's like 10,000 people, and it's this massive screen. And it was a little surreal just to be, you know, involved with that and a part of that. But I want to bring this all back to this one thing. Like a lot of people, I am still trying to figure it out. No, you know, yeah. This idea of success, this idea of you made it, I don't even know what that means necessarily. I have friends who have, I just think, you know, wow, that person has made it. But that person would say, yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out. And we function in this industry where people are often living on the edge of fear of, like, yeah, I don't know if I can stay in this industry. And I don't know if anyone's going to ever hire me again. I listened to this podcast by one of my favorite cinematographers, Roger Deakins, and he just interviews all these people in the world of film, right? And famous people across the board. And it's astonishing to me how many of them say the same thing. Like before they got that job that like rocketed them to fame and success, they were ready to just throw in the towel. And I often wonder about that, just because the life of a creative can be just so unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why right now I work at JP Chase, which I know is a bank, right? We have an in-house agency. But the reason that I'm there is because after I ran my own production company for 10 years, in the beginning, I did a lot of travel, but the travel became more intense. And even though all of my clients were US based, I had a lot of international work. I'd be gone for weeks at a time. And once we started having kids, it became unsustainable. And it was Christina who said to me, this is not working. It's not working for our family. We've got to figure out something else. And it literally took me and Christina helping me. I always got to give credit to Christina. Like a couple of years, I would say, to figure out how to create a resume. Meaning that like, here I am running my own company, but how do I like translate that into something that's going to be some sort of a job, right?
Yep.
And once I figured that out, then I was able to get some interviews, and I had a couple job offers, and I leveraged one against the other, and that's how I ended up at JP Chase.
You've been
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Well, you've talked about this. As a matter of fact, we've had these conversations about how it is a constant struggle. People think that there's after you achieve the goal, all greatness is there, but greatness is always about pushing to the next level. And I know that greatness starts with different trials. To your point, there were a number of people that were about to throw in a towel. Now, one thing that you did share just a minute ago that absolutely hit me over the head. I've known you for a long time now. I never knew that you had dyslexia, ever. There was no way that I would have ever thought that you ever had dyslexia. There's no way. I'm just wondering. Oh no!
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. What I was just saying is, how did you take that, channel that, overcome that? Because I know there were doubts. I know there are all those different other things, but how do you overcome something and just make sure that you're focused on the objective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So speaking for myself, I don't have any great answer other than to say I've worked really hard. I still struggle from dyslexia. You know, a university like Columbia, regardless of your degree, is going to require you to read and write a lot.
Yes.
They want you to come away with a strong foundation as a writer, right? And reading is not something that comes quickly to me. I don't devour books quickly, right? And writing. So I learned, and mind you, this is coming back to school after a long time. I'm an adult. I'm more mature. I'm paying for my own education.
Right.
I learned that I'm not one of those people that can just wing it. I cannot write a paper the night before and get a good grade. The minute something gets assigned, I learned to be more organized in that way. And I learned to discipline myself to just get on top of it. Partly just because I needed to get through the reading. I found myself frustrated sometimes that a lot of the task of one's formal education is how quickly can you read this thing and how quickly can you condense down all of this information to something that is coherent and give me a cogent argument in a paper. That's why I didn't like philosophy. Christina studied philosophy, and I always said, I hated my philosophy class because I thought, hold on, you want me to read the writings of these philosophers who are so difficult to like grasp, but you want me to write a clear, cogent analysis of what is clearly to me not clear. And anyway, I will say though that I'm not the only dyslexic person. People who have been diagnosed with dyslexia, there's a book, and I can't remember the name of it. It was about all the people who have gone on to do amazing things, where they're talking about Teddy Roosevelt or Tom Cruise, also people who have struggled with dyslexia. It's again, it's not about native intelligence. It's all about how you input and bring in information. Yeah.
That is.
Yeah, it seems like I have some friends that are dyslexic as well, and it seems like the people that have successfully dealt with it, because it's not something you overcome ever. Just like you, they developed very, very, you know, they're very regimented. You know what I mean? They know how to attack a problem, and I don't know. I look at your life, and just from what you've talked to us in this podcast, it sounds like, you know, when you first started college, you really weren't interested. It wasn't something that you were really engaged in, probably with high school. And it's one of those, which came first, the chicken or the egg, you know, were you frustrated with school because of your dyslexia, or were you just not interested in school? But when you finally found something that you were passionate about, your passion overcame your struggle with dyslexia, and you were able to push through. I don't know. I just think it's awesome. And I think at some point it probably became, this sounds horrible. Well, not horrible, but it probably became a blessing to you to some degree, because it gave you that structure and it gave you a way to tackle problems. One thing I'm interested in is when you start a creative endeavor, or let's say you're going to approach a documentary or something like that, where do you start?
Yeah.
Like how do you initially engage with that? Like, what's kind of your initial process?
Well, there are two things. I'm really interested in a strong story and strong visuals. That's a secret sauce. And it sounds really obvious, but a lot of people have really great ideas for great stories, but sometimes visually they don't necessarily lend themselves to great stories.
Yeah.
If my brother-in-law, who's an accountant, ever sees this, he would probably laugh, because he and I had this conversation where I said, you know how there's all these shows about doctors, there's TV shows and film, doctors and lawyers. There's never any shows really about accountants.
Well, Ben Affleck was in a movie called The Accountant, right?
That is true. That is true. But I'm saying that, generally speaking, right? But then yes, but I mean, like, courtroom drama, the drama of life and death,
Yeah.
versus the drama of, is this spreadsheet right or not? You know,
Right.
You know, I don't mean to overly simplify, and I don't mean to, like, but what I'm saying is that, like, to answer your question, Gary, what is the story? What is, you know, the funny thing about stories is that people often have stories, and they're great stories. We all have stories, even what people think of as the most mundane thing, or the mundane, you know, they themselves, like, there's no story in my life, but everybody has a story. It's just kind of like, how do you tell that story? But some stories here's the thing. I'm the strong believer in that. What is the universal connector? I'll give you an example. Back in the 1970s, Sylvester Stallone won the Oscar and all this acclaim for the first Rocky, right?
Yep.
Right. Most people don't even know that about him. It's been so long. But when the first Rocky came out, it was mind-blowing. And so much praise was heaped on Sylvester Stallone, rightfully so, because it was like his first film. There's also the behind the scenes, right? Like, Hollywood said, yeah, we'll fund it, but we don't want you to play. It's got to be somebody else. But he was insistent, no, I'm going to play that lead role, right? When you look at the success of that film, it's not to say that Americans, it didn't reveal that Americans love boxing. Some do. But the success was not because of boxing. The success was because it was his story, the underdog story, the universal theme, right? All stories, every film that you watch that you love it because there's this universal thing that connects with you, even though it's got nothing to do with you. There's that human element, that universality that every good story has to have.
Yes.
And so, like, as a storyteller, you've got to find that. What is that thing that rises above its subject matter?
Yeah.
And then how do you tell that story, right? So, to contradict myself, it's not to say that you can't tell a good story about accountants. You can. unless I get hate mail from accountants. But you know, it's about the universal themes.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about.
You know, I want to add to that. There is a film that you did with your daughter on the COVID pandemic. It was a short. It was but everyone's gone through it. A common experience, right? Over the past year and a half.
Yeah.
That film nailed me right between the eyes, man. I mean, it hit with such impact. It was so simple. And Gary, you've got to check this out. And we'll put a link in there, but it's the story of the pandemic through her eyes, and it's mind blowing. It's very little is said. It's very simple in its filmography, but oh my gosh, Manahi, that was unreal, unreal, and to connect like that. What I'm just wondering, how did that pop in your head? I know you're telling a story, but that story was just so mesmerizing. I had to watch it over and over again.
Thank you, Maurice. I appreciate that. So when the pandemic hit, I panicked because my job requires me to be out in the field, out in the world. And I just wasn't sure, so my team, we have a team of 35, 40 people now.
Yeah.
And I act as like the in-house cinematographer / creative. I wear a few different hats, but my job as a cinematographer is very much in the forefront of my job. And so I wasn't sure what to do. And so like a lot of people, everything just came to a halt and I was just at home. And after a while, I'm always that guy. I wanted to do something creative. I needed to sort of, scratch that itch or whatever the expression is.
Yes.
And so because I had done like projects with my family before, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something less documentary, more narrative in nature. And the idea came from having conversations with my kids and just listening to them. And what I realized was that right in the first couple of months of the pandemic, you, me, and everybody else, we were glued to the media. There was just this endless stream of information about the pandemic, and it was all bad. It was dire. Yeah. And there was just a lot of conflicting information, and everybody just wanted to really try to wrap their brain around how bad is this, right?
Right.
And it just seemed like death and destruction is at the door, literally.
Yeah.
Right. But listening to my kids, I realized that they're not paying attention to the media the way we are. They're just getting trickles of filtered down information from us, their parents. And so it's scary for us, but it's scary for them. But they're just worse informed than we are. So I wanted to do something. I wanted to make a short film about the pandemic through the eyes of a child. And so I literally pulled out my laptop and I just asked them questions. What do you know about the pandemic? How do you get this virus? Who's most susceptible? I was just writing down everything. What scares you the most? I'm just writing it all down. And then I just took all of that stuff and I just looked at it and I thought, okay, that's my building block for the script. So a lot of what she says is just literally straight out of her mouth, Cecily and Thea, the youngest one. I initially wanted Thea to be the voice because I wanted a very, very young child's voice.
Right.
And when I did the first recording, and they had bunk beds at the time, and I draped moving blankets over it, and we crawled underneath, and it was really hot at the time. And I had my microphone, and we made a little home recording audio studio. And I had it all printed out. Since Thea can't read, I would read her the lines, and she would read it back, and I would try to coach a performative aspect out of her. But it just wasn't working. So the voice that you hear was actually my second try, and that was Cecily. She's a little bit older, and she did great. And there were like multiple readings. So what you hear in the film is my selectively pulling together the right takes, the right inflection, and just piecing it out. And she came through. But I will say, I was interested in knowing what can I do as one person,
Yes.
right? Remember how I said that film is a team sport?
Yes.
So I'm like, what can I do as one person? I had the luxury of time. I had the luxury of shooting when the light was right. I don't have a crew with a bunch of lights. I don't have an 18K sitting outside my window that looks like the sun. I really needed the sun. You know, I didn't need to location scout my house. I've got a very good sense because I'm kind of light sensitive. I know where things look good and when, at what time of day. And so I just kind of like piece it together, and I only shot when I knew it was going to be right. Sometimes it was hard for my kids. My kids they don't act for me. They don't respond to me, and they're often tired of me pointing a camera. So what you see in the end is just the result of lots of bits of things coming together, and I don't know, it worked out. But here's the thing, Maurice, Gary, I did this in isolation.
Yeah.
I put this out in the world without a single person looking at this or, you know, responding to it. I just put it out in the world. And I don't think that I was fully prepared for some of the comments that came to me. I knew that we were all going through this at the same time, but I don't think I realized how much people would connect to that.
Well,
yeah.
Part of that, Manahi, and this is straight from my own opinion, the thing that was so amazing about that video is that it came in a time when, well, and it still is politically divided, all those other things. That video hit at the heart of everyone, and it was a unifier. It really was. It came straight from the heart, and it was a unifier. And I think that from a film perspective is something it was magical. It's magical. I can't say enough about that film, man. I really can't.
What's the name of the video? How can people find that? Because people listening on the podcast would definitely want to see that.
Oh, sure. It's on Vimeo. It's called The Wait. It's also on YouTube called The Wait. Maurice, can I tell you what line always struck me?
What's
because
that?
she actually said it.
Uh-huh.
It's when she said, if I live to be a grown-up, what I'll remember most is playing with my sister.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes.
Because when I was asking those questions on my laptop, and I said, what will you remember most when this is all done?
Yes.
Yeah, she stunned me. She said, well, if I live to be a grown-up.
Yeah.
Oh. That is a heavy statement. That is a heavy statement.
Yeah. For a father. Hearing that from his daughter.
Yeah.
Whew.
And just, I mean, even you say that wells up that emotion, man. It's unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Me too.
Well, and what's so neat about it, and there's so many examples of this as we've gone through this, is it's such a balanced statement though as well. On one side you have "If I Live," which is just gut-wrenching and horrific, and then on the other hand you say, you know, it's the time I spent with my sister. You know, to me that's just what a powerful statement.
Yeah.
You know, from all. Sorry, I'm getting a little choked up.
Oh no.
Okay, we can have a big bro hug.
Yeah. Right. Thanks, Manahi. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. This is a stoke meter first, but but we have kids. You know, Maurice has kids. I have kids. You know, my twins went through their graduation year in 2020. You know, it's just one of those things, and I think people get so wrapped up in the politics and the drama and all that type of stuff. Sometimes you forget about, like you said, the people that don't really understand.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, The Wait. Go watch it, people.
Yes. No doubt about it. No doubt.
When I released that in April 2020, we just didn't know how long the wait would really be.
Yeah.
Very timely. It was very, very timely. Oh my goodness. No, Manahi, I know that when we were talking about this, you were thinking, what can I contribute? I mean, I hope I have something of value. And I could say without a doubt that, oh my goodness, you just nailed me straight in the heart, man. Straight in the heart. You always You always have. I mean, we've always had a good connection from the poly style, but this is something that really went to the crux of human emotion, um, through story, through commonality, through so many
Yeah.
things that you just said. And I can't thank you enough, man. Cannot thank
Oh,
you
of
enough.
course. Can I say one more thing about story?
Please do.
Absolutely.
I think that the importance of story in part is that we can understand each other.
Yes.
And what could be more crucial today
Yes.
than understanding each other, right?
100%. Yes.
We are, especially in America, so deeply divided.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever in my lifetime seen such a stark divide and contrast in America as I have in the past 4 years.
Yeah.
And that to me is the power of story. And I think that as time goes by, certainly in my industry, or, you know, there are more and more people whose stories need to be told. You know, film, for example, just as a medium, is not that old,
Yes.
but it's predominantly told through a certain lens, a certain racial lens. These are all good, but I'm saying that there's so much more underneath the surface. There's so much more beyond that. And my hope in a very grand sense is that we can sort of gain a greater appreciation, and I'll use this word very intentionally, empathy
Yes.
through story. Yeah.
I can see no better way than end it right there. Thank you so much, man. And we've got to do it again. Got to do it again.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you
My
so much.
pleasure. Thanks, guys.